In 1826, the shores of Princess Royal Harbour on the south coast of Western Australia were chosen for the site of the town of Albany. Back then it was called Frederickstown. The steady stream of settlers from the other side of the world precipitated changes in the landscape at a scale never imagined by the indigenous people who for centuries had called this area home. As agriculture expanded, the water balance and nutrient supply and demand in the natural systems shifted. That change brought benefits, but also new and unexpected problems. Hello, my name's Steve Janicke. In this documentary, I give a brief account of an unusual project that took place here in Princess Royal Harbour during the 1990s. These are seagrasses, marine flowering plants. They're often confused with algae or seaweed. During the early 1970s, various local government authorities and community members began to express concern about the environmental health of both Princess Royal Harbour and nearby Oyster Harbour. Investigation showed that there was a rapid and substantial loss of natural seagrass cover in the harbour. It was thought that excessive nutrient inputs were providing the fuel for massive growths of algae, and this in turn was smothering the seagrass. These seagrass meadows are considered important for fish breeding and can serve other important ecological functions. In 1990, a bulletin by the Environmental Protection Authority listed a number of management recommendations to tackle the likely sources of pollution and its consequences. One of the recommendations was that the growing algal accumulations needed to be dealt with quickly.
Recommendation 2. That algae harvesters be deployed to enable immediate removal of the large accumulations of macroalgae in Princess Royal Harbour and Oyster Harbour. The rate of removal should be sufficient to remove those accumulations by March 1992.
Underwater algae harvesting. It was an ambitious task. In the years prior to this, some special equipment had been designed for the removal of algal build-up in the shallows of Peel Inlet, south of Perth. This operation had been a response to public complaints about the smell of rotting matter being washed up along the foreshore. The Peel was having its own problems with nutrient pollution in the local catchments. It was felt that this equipment could provide a way of dealing with the problems in the Albany harbours. As with many practical projects, the idea soon met with a number of logistical problems. Princess Royal Harbour is relatively shallow around the edges, and surveys suggested that the greatest accumulations of macroalgae were along the southern shores. Threatening the seagrasses were two species of macroalgae, the finely branching Cladophora, found in both shallow and deeper waters, and the stringy, hair-like Chaetomorpha that gathered in dense banks in the shallower parts of the harbour. It seemed that there were only two options for removal, and they were to either scoop it up or to suck it up. Consequently, two types of barge-mounted units were delivered to Albany. The first one was built for the Peel Inlet works, and later a second unit was added. These operated on the scoop method that consisted of a stainless steel conveyor belt that lowered into the water and rolled backward as it glided across the bed in front of the barge. This was called, somewhat unimaginatively, a conveyor harvester. The conveyor harvesters had provision to store algae on board, and it drained as it was brought up out of the water, making it relatively easy to handle. The harsh marine environment and the abrasive properties of algae and sand rapidly took their toll on the machinery. The second type of harvester was a barge fitted with a large device similar to a vacuum cleaner head, but using a powerful pump to suck up water and hopefully the free-floating cladophora. It was lowered to the harbour floor and drawn along, supported by side wheels. The suction harvester had to discharge the material into a cage located on a transport barge moored alongside. This material was waterlogged and not easy to drain or to move. However, the unit could operate in depths up to 2.5 metres. The effectiveness of the harvesting was a controversial topic, and the prototype harvesters were less than perfect. However, the dense accumulations in the work area had almost eradicated the seagrass meadows. The March 1992 deadline came and went, and it was clear that the task of removal was going to be a lot tougher than was first thought. Nonetheless, by the end of 1993, returns of algae in the areas crossed by the suction harvesters had diminished to the point that it was decided to focus on the shallow shoreward accumulations. The transport barges became the preferred means of unloading the algal material at a shore facility, where it was taken to a disposal site at the town rubbish tip. The day-to-day operation was dictated by winds, tides and breakdowns. The harvesting team put their heads together with local engineering fabricators and came up with innovative ideas that significantly reduced costs and increased equipment reliability. By September 1997, macroalgae had once again grown across the area originally covered by the suction barge, and for the next 6 months this form of harvesting was recommenced. Meanwhile, significant changes were being implemented with respect to management of nutrient sources, and a final review of the operation was undertaken to determine whether the harvesting should continue. It was concluded that the harvesting operation should stop, as there was not enough evidence that the original goal was attainable. The harvesting operation ceased at the end of March 1998. History shows that improvements in the way we as a community look after our environment requires much experimentation, often in the face of opposition and the status quo. But now, 12 years later, there is little to show that the harvesting operation ever took place.